Hello there, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Political Scope. I'm your host, Edward Lane, and with me in studio this evening is Dr. Roger Luncheon, head of the Presidential Secretariat. Dr. Luncheon, welcome to the program.
Good night, Eddie.
Our discussions this evening will focus on the respect for diversity, a pillar of the PPPC's social policy. Dr. Luncheon, social policy itself dictates that the responsibilities that the state assumes in distribution of social goods and services to citizens, and diversity on the other hand reflects both the existence of different people and cultures like the Guyanese society itself, as well as the state's response to that social reality and how well the state is able to more or less distribute its resources and craft social policies to ensure it captures the diversity of the Guyanese society.
This is indeed so.
I want to start off to examine first and foremost the first part of our topic, respect for diversity. How fundamental is the PPC position remaining?
Well, I would probably say that this issue of respect for diversity is one that has involved humanity from the time there was more than one person in the world, because with numbers inevitably came diversity. And to remind the Guyanese and listeners that indeed this diversity and the respect for diversity has attracted the widest range of human responses. On one end, some of the most glorious chapters in the history of human endeavor has been written when it comes to respect for diversity. On the other hand, some of the most infamous examples have occurred and shown the insensitivity of man to man based on the color of the skin and the color of the hair and religious differences, geographic differences, tribal differences. And therefore, this issue of respect for diversity, indeed, it is so fundamental to social organizations and societies. And a social policy, a practical social policy of administrations that take direct and fundamental responsibility for addressing the issues surrounding respect for diversity is understandably an important feature of that government or those administrations. And so it has been with the People's Progressive Party from the days of the PSC. Because you must remember that we too have had our share of diversity. We've come from different places and brought here slaves, indentured. We've met the denied forced people. And over the centuries that we have been here in this cauldron, British Guyana and post-independence Guyana, we have had to learn the good and the bad that comes with the respect or the disrespect for the diversity. Where we are today, I would want to hazard a guess that we have conquered the fundamentals. The society, the Guyanese society, aided and abetted by the most permissive of governments, the PPPC government, has indeed confronted all aspects of diversity in Guyana and has committed itself to dealing with respect for diversity, and has put in place, not we having to go and almost invent the wheel. We just had to be pragmatic and understanding and apply those features of intervention that have been used elsewhere and are appropriate for the Guyanese situation. And so constitutional means, statutory means, executive, administrative, and they have all been used in focusing the Guyanese population on embracing its diversity, not rejecting it, not questioning it, but to recognize that this is our social reality. We all can't be the same. We will never be the same. And what we have to learn to live with. And indeed, I think the job of getting that mindset has been completed. What is remaining? I think the work that, and the commendable work that has been done by our educational system has to continue. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that there is such a link between respect for diversity and educational achievements. I might say I wish every Guyanese was a university graduate, because I feel that with education, with knowledge comes wisdom, and that would allow this respect for diversity to actually flower in the Guyanese environment. So to my mind, moving assiduously on the educational front and to imbue the Guyanese people with a heightened culture, not a narrow culture, the culture of a race or the culture of a people, but a culture of the Guyanese in toto. That broad culture would allow us to embrace diversity. And that is where it all begins and ends. We have to love what is our own.
The issue, I think, Dr. Luncheon, too, a lot of people, when they hear diversity in a Guyanese context, they think, just the 6 races. But I think it has taken on a different spin or an additional element now, and that has to do with an issue of class in terms of the various classes in society. You have the lower class, the middle class, and those in the higher class. But your party would have been in power for 22 years and a few months, to be exact. And are there any historic highs and lows of the PPC's entrenchment of the respect for diversity?
Yes, I would say lows, but I don't want to be inconsistent with my opening statement, which essentially said the battle is practically won. And I'm saying that because it then says lows are historical. Our laws are history. The laws and particular aspects have been one by one addressed by this successive PPPC administration, and they have been removed from those situations that have plagued the Guyanese people in terms of the respect for diversity. I have labored over many, many years in looking at the real big events, the ones that, to my mind, captured my imagination. And one of them I'd want to share with you, because I think when it comes to tenacity, when it comes to the commitment to achieving a goal, it had to be the Jagons and the pursuit of labor and the interests of organized labor. And this dovetails with the point that you were making about class and the diversity that surrounds class in Guyana. In those years of the Political Affairs Committee, the colonial British Guyana exploitation was the norm. British colonialism wasn't easy, my friend. And the job of getting the respect for labor was undertaken by the PACers, including Dr. Jagan and his wife. Dr. Jagan and his wife. Their struggles over the years to deal with labor and respect for organized labor saw reversals. These are some of the laws that we have overcome. Suspension of the Constitution with the Labor Relations Bill. Definitely, for Janet Jagan, one of the major lows of her career here, presence here in Guyana. But then, as I said to you, we have overcome. And 19, in her term in office, as the president of Guyana, Trade Union Recognition and Certification Act became the law of Guyana. Respect for organized labor, respect for diversity. And this is what has happened with so many other laws, that over the years of time, the fluctuation of time, particularly during the reign of the PPPC government, what used to exist, what used to epitomize the difficulties we had in inculcating respect for diversity, one by one they fell. One by one they were overcome. And one by one they were replaced by entrenched elements, instruments that enshrined and promoted the respect for diversity in Guyana. I could mention highs, those developments, or the ones that are really original. 206, the First Peoples Act, the Amerindians Act. Population, the First People, denied for centuries, the subject of the gravest inequities that could exist, not only in Guyana, wherever they are, the subject of inequitable relationships with the existing power structures. But Guyana, in 2006, and that memorable act, the Amerindian Act of 2006, another blow, another affirmation by this administration that we are dedicated to eradicating the disrespect, the ignoring of diversity, and embracing among Guyanese people what we are and a love for what we are, and helping that to promote what we will become. So yes, highs and lows, but consistent with what I feel, what I sense, what I insist can be documented. We have indeed turned a corner, and we have made those interventions that for all intents and purposes would and have and will continue to prevent any reversal when it comes to respect for diversity in Guyana.
We touch on two critical elements of the Guyana reality, and that is the issue of race and class.
Yes.
Having looked at that, can you discuss possibly the PPPC's position and its evolution in this context, the issue of race and class?
We started out from the time of the Political Affairs Committee being extremely conscious of the way in which race and class, separate as they were, but interrelated as they are, were actually being used to the disadvantage, to retard the development of a modern Guyana, to frustrate the ambitions of the Guyanese people, regardless of their race and class and religion. In essence, here were two social phenomena that were being used to divide the Guyanese people. And indeed, the formation of a political movement that embraced all the races and embraced classes of Guyanese in the struggle against British colonialism was always seen, and for me would continue to be, the height of political development in Guyana. People have heard me speaking of a return to the spirit of the 53s. They cannot appreciate how much I yearn for that development. A point in time where we can resurrect that coming together and remove those obstacles that have been organized one way or the other by one agent or the other, where class is concerned, where race is concerned, to keep us divided and to engender these insecurities in our population. Insecurities that I must say, times like now, general elections, suddenly provide scope for politicians and demagogues to whip up imaginary issues on the basis of race and class, to have some insight, inroads into voting and into the electorate. Our party, the People's Progressive Party, has taken principal positions. Number one, a national party. A national party. A party whose leadership, whose membership, whose supporters reflect the reality of the Guyanese people. There are no class, no race, no religion excluded. They're all there. You go at a conference, at a congress, you look at the party leadership, you look at the government leadership, and you see a microcosm of Guyana. A national, and it is an effort. It is a commitment that has been adopted, been mainstreamed by Comrade Chetty in our engagement with the Guyanese and with the world at large, that indeed, where it comes to the Guyana reality, when it comes to race and class, this is where we stand. Where class is concerned, the newer realities, because of course race is, was, and forever will be. You are not going to ever be a race that you're not. I am not ever going to be what I'm not. But class, a feature of production, indeed, will see over time the creation of groupings and relationships between those groupings. And indeed, it provides us with all of the instincts to keep a positive look at economic development, but also recognizing that there's a downside. Class formation, antagonistic relationships between classes, and the state. I said it before, the state responsibility in engendering the respect for biodiversity, for diversity, its obligation in this economic sphere to deal with the redistribution of wealth. We can't stop people from aspiring to be rich. We even can't stop them from being rich. Deng Xiaoping, the president, the opening up, the general secretary of the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party there, spoke to the issue when he said, let us create wealth. But in recognition of the downside, the redistribution of wealth, attention to the common good, attention to the common good, the notion that the individual and individual rights are not prioritized, are not supreme to those of the common good, and redistribution of wealth. And I believe succinctly the People's Progressive Party has embraced those facets and has said, we raise this concern that indeed by adopting a national position, we have shown clearly that the People's Progressive Party is a home for all and sundry. You can belong. And there is no, in the context of its membership, in the context of its work, discrimination on that basis.
The fact that the issue of class and development of the whole issue of class is as a result, like you rightly said, because of the economic changes taking place in a particular country. We have seen here in Guyana as of recent an emerging middle class, but that by itself, you know, your party in government would have been attacked on many occasions about, you know, promoting a particular grouping. How do you respond to that now, bearing in mind this emergence of a middle class in Guyana?
You can't, as I said, influence the aspirations of the Guyanese people to get rich, to create wealth. You have to recognize that it is indeed by harnessing, promoting those ambitions that indeed we can achieve what we are all interested in, the growth and the development of our economy, and as a consequence, the improvement in the life of the Guyanese people. Make no doubt, make no question about it. Our economic development is indeed fundamental to our aspirations to become a middle class or even a better than middle class country. Our economy has to grow for our people's well-being to improve. And the improvement, the growth and development of our economy is inextricably linked to the endeavors of these different classes of Guyanese who in fulfilling their ambitions to create wealth and get rich, consequentially allow Guyana and its economy to grow and its people to indeed become better equipped and better resourced in the modern world.
Let's just go ahead. Go ahead.
So it is quite clear to me that we have, you might say, the old people will say fire is a good master, a good servant, but a bad master. And we have to recognize that, yes, indeed, whilst we need to pursue vigorously economic growth and development, and this model that we are using that recognizes contributions, major contributions by individuals and not the state, major contributions by individuals, we have to be deeply conscious of what can be consequences and to take those steps. And again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These things have been done elsewhere. We have to ensure that in our quest, in our commitment to respect for diversity along class lines, that indeed the fundamental tool of redistribution of wealth is applied assiduously to this situation.
Let us talk a little about diversity in religion and your government's and your party's quest to more or less promote the issue of national unity. We have quite a number. Well, we have a very diverse religious landscape.
I will say this as we look in the world at large, and we see many schisms within religions and between religions. It cannot help but make us fonder of the Guyanese reality. Our work in the PPPC administration is perhaps one that is encouraging, one that in the context of the religious tolerance that has been part and parcel of the religious environment in Guyana makes the task, makes the job so much easier. It makes the difficulties almost minimal. Our task is to keep it that way. Our task is to ensure that those principles, those practices, the people and the organizations that entrench religious tolerance, as has been practiced over the centuries here in Guyana, that indeed they are fulfilled and they can continue to work along those same lines and promoting, expanding on the concepts that they have used to enshrine religious tolerance in Guyana. The administration, I must say, has been operating in a very fertile area, extremely fertile area, in working with the main faiths in Guyana and ensuring that we maintain a enormous influence by the administration in furthering religious tolerance. And in so many words, doing what is necessary to respond to the threats of racial, of religious intolerance. to be able to identify sources of religious intolerance, where it's coming from, to respond, to neutralize it, and to be able to preserve this embracing, all embracing environment in Guyana of religious tolerance. This is a task that we are extremely comfortable with discharging because the ground is fertile. Our religious communities themselves supportive and embrace religious tolerance.
Looking at the geographics of Guyana and how our country is laid out, and the population and so forth, in terms of the diversity of the population, and more so the geographic challenges that emerge. Let us talk a little about that.
Well, I think you would want to agree that historical, geographic considerations have indeed led to many negative impacts on social integration. And those negative impacts have had various associated negative consequences on the respect for diversity. I spoke earlier about the First People, and I think they epitomize the situation where geographic considerations have produced an untold negative impact on their quest for respect for diversity. It is, as the old people say, out of sight, out of mind. Indeed, you're out there, and the terms we use in the bush, in the hinterland, in the interior, all of them connote this sort of sentiment that there is a us geographically and there is a them geographically. And it gives some sort of psychological justification of these inequities, many of which are bred on the geographic considerations. I mean, a beer in, let's say, Upper Maz in Paramacatai in exactly $100. It might be more like $1,000 or more. Similarly, a sweet drink. So, geographic considerations create their own havoc, and they demand their own special responses in terms of dealing fundamentally with crafting programs to reduce and eliminate inequity, and in essence enhancing the respect for diversity. And in the context of the First People, I believe I mentioned the high in our efforts, the PPPC efforts. I spoke about the 2006 Amerindian Act that statutorily codified what our mutual responsibilities are, and indeed to go further to recognize that it is not only in the realm of statute, it is also constitutional, it is also executive. In other words, all of the levers of state that the state can exert in addressing the issues of inequities, principally based on geographic considerations, that they are indeed dealt with one by one. A checklist, as I see it, that says this issue of inequity that is geographically based, we will deal with. Here is our plan, here is our program, here is the year in which it will be dealt with. This second one, here it will be dealt with. This third one, here it would be dealt with. And this is how I see the People's Progressive Party civic administration, government, indeed addressing the respect for diversity where geographic considerations play such a dominant role. I know historically it used to be in societies that were much smaller, the urban-rural schisms, but transportation, telecommunications, and such like has certainly gone a far way of dealing with those minor schisms in our context. It is the hinterland, the interior, the bush. That is where the sore points will have to be addressed and continue to be addressed as we maintain our focus on respecting diversity and having a principled position about eliminating inequities.
You touch on three areas of critical importance when dealing with a country with geographics like ours. Issue of transportation, telecommunication, education. Could you say off the bat though, what are some of your government's efforts with regards to those three areas to bridge that gap between the hinterland, the interior, and the coastline?
Most of the efforts, particularly over the 2 terms in office by the Jagdeo government and the current term by the Ramatar government, has concentrated, one, on education. I think there should be no question in the minds of Guyanese on the level of investments that have been made in educational pursuits, in the dismantling of inequities between that population and the coastal population, whether it is primary schools, secondary schools, dormitories, trained teachers. The effort has been commendable. The effort indeed has paid off. More and more students are entering into the formal education system and contributing in dramatic ways to the development of the communities from which they come. They might stay in their own communities, or they come to Georgetown and are taught, trained, return to their communities, or have a life elsewhere. But the focus on education to eliminate the inequities and to have an equitable system, the coast and the hinterland, has been one of the constants of the PPP civic from 92 all the way to today, 2015. When it comes to telecommunications, I think for me, it is the investment highlighted by the investment by the private sector or telecommunication service providers in mobile telephony or learning channel that indeed has removed this, what we might say, fixation in giving the coastal population more and more to the relative disadvantage to the hinterland population. And so we have seen at quite significant costs, financial, logistics, and other costs, further commitments in the area of telecommunication. And when it comes to transportation, I think the story is not yet written. But I would look at the growth of our aviation sector and the development of airdromes and airstrips in the hinterland areas, the investments in roads, the investment in maritime transportation. I think when one sits down and recognizes that there is a coastal and there is a hinterland equivalent, and one actually does the numbers, one can clearly see the level of shift, the level of attention that is being paid, addressing specifically inequities, and the thrust to make more equitable the point I made earlier, the distribution of social goods and services. These three areas remain a focus. They have not been unattended by the People's Progressive Party civic government.
If you're to look at it now, Dr. Luncheon, bearing in mind the efforts that your government would have made, and bearing in mind what we've seen maybe in the last 3 years politically in Guyana, are you comfortable where we are with regards to addressing the issue of diversity and the distribution of, in terms of social policies?
Yes, I can say this without any reservation, without any hesitation. But I don't want to convey a notion that with this degree of satisfaction we're prepared to throw back, so to speak, and rest on our laurels. I started off by recognizing that, like every other social ambition, mission in life, there is the ideal. I recognize that. And I want to say, I cannot, in all justification, say we have achieved the ideal. I spoke about my deep yearning for a return to the spirit of 53. I spoke of my utter conviction that for this country to continue on its trajectory of moving forward, more and more we have to harness the resources of all our people. More and more we have to harness the resources of all our people. We have to educate them. We have to build a culture of cooperation and collaboration. We have to build a selfless devotion to what this country stands for and what it needs. And to my mind, that or those aspects have yet to be grappled with in any forthright way. We have to move forward. Work, and enormous work has been done. But when we look ahead, we recognize what more has to be done. And we recognize what is needed to get it done. And that is important. What needs to be done? Yes. Equally important, what is needed to get it done.
Let us talk a little about that in terms of where the future would lie in the PPPC, the future, and that has to do with the issue of handling diversity.
For me, we have essentially established the groundwork. We have the pattern. So, a major element is consolidation. We need to remain focused. We need to enforce and to make the respect for diversity so ingrained, it's like rain falling, it's like the sun shining. It becomes a part of our very nature. This I refer to as enculturation. It got to be a cultural something. It has to be a cultural something. Work has to be done on that. And I said it and I'll say it again. Our educational system has a tremendous responsibility for so doing. Our educational system. There is where I wouldn't say the battle or the war will be waged, but this is where the action will play out. This is where it will play out. An educated Guyana is a Guyana, I insist, that will embrace respect for biodiversity. So we have to indeed keep the focus on our educational system, on the output of our educational system as it encourages greater and greater respect for diversity and indeed enshrines respect in our doing. Legislative, constitutional instruments, the monitoring and the evaluation, it is to make sure that those, whether inadvertent or otherwise, efforts or events of backsliding are seen, picked up immediately, and responded to appropriately. And to my mind, that's the fullest comprehension. We got to consolidate. We have to ensure that we have an emergent culture, one that embraces respect for diversity, and one that is inculcated by our educational system, by the products of education. And we have to look at what is happening with enforcement and support it by appropriate legislation, constitutional instruments that maintain what we have achieved.
What role do you see political unity play in this process as you look forward?
I cannot believe, and I would refuse to accept, that any political party on the scene today in Guyana would want to expose anything different from what I have said tonight. What I do believe is in examining their very actions, because I've said before, politics is the art of the impossible. And indeed it is true. There is nothing that stops a category of professionals like politicians from saying one thing and doing something totally different, or having something done that is totally counterproductive. And that is why it is not just what they say. It is not only what they do. It also has a lot to do with what happens once they are the ones who have the impulse, who have the power and the authority to get things done. What the old people call putting your money where the mouth is. That is where I see it.
In closing, Dr. Luncheon, if you're to sum up the issue of diversity and the social policies of your government, how do you sum that up?
I would go back to the beginning to reflect on diversity as a reality. We came from everywhere and we came here. To appreciate the need for respect for diversity to be overriding for any society as diverse as ours to congeal, to unite, to move forward, to develop. It cannot be done ignoring respect for diversity. The People's Progressive Party is totally committed to respect for diversity and the promotion of respect for diversity.
Dr. Roger Lungeon, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. Of course, our discussions were centered on the respect for diversity, a pillar of the PPP social policies. Thank you very much, Dr. Lungeon.
Thank you again.
And thank you very much for joining us. You'll have a good rest of the evening.